What's going on? C's the MC. Listen to Coltrane. What's up, mom and dad? Calculation.
What's
Peace.
up, fam?
How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Hey, fantastic. Hey, this is a real big deal for me, so I appreciate you joining me this evening.
Yo, I love that poster in the background. That's fresh.
Yeah, who is that?
It's some group I heard of called Arrested Development. I love it, man. That's fresh.
Thank you.
That's real
Uh,
fresh. Thank you.
for everybody logging on right now, this is history lesson number 98 with speech from the legendary Arrested Development. Like I said, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And shout out to the brother Twan Mack for connecting the dots.
Twan is the dude, man. Great guy.
Absolutely.
Great guy. Hip hop
Absolutely.
legend. No doubt.
So I want to do a little history lesson and then work our way up to your latest album, Don't Fight Your Demons. I want to jump right into it. If we could take it back to where you were born and raised.
I was born in Milwaukee, raised in Milwaukee. Or really, like I was raised in Wauwatosa, which is about, I don't know, 10 minutes from Milwaukee.
What was life like as a teenager for speech growing up in Milwaukee?
It was cool. Like Milwaukee is a very segregated city. Um, I grew up in the suburbs of Wauwatosa, the only black family in the entire neighborhood. When I was a young kid, up to like third grade, I was the only black kid in my entire grade school. Then I went to, then Milwaukee had what they call busing, this whole busing program. And so they would bus black people in from the inner city to the suburbs. And, so then I was around all black people. And then my mom at the same time, my mom and dad owned the largest black newspaper in Milwaukee the entire time. So I would always go into the inner city because, like I said, it's real segregated. So I go into inner city every day. But so growing up, it was very interesting. I saw like two sides of life, and I also like as a teen, it was sort of cool, and it was starting to get dangerous. So like as a teen, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of parties, a lot of house parties, a lot of what they call basement parties back in the day. We had I used to DJ, so I was one of the hottest DJs in the city, and so a lot of spinning, a lot of parties, good times, and then of course as time I shouldn't say of course as time went on, it started to get a lot more violent, and I talk about it on one of the songs we used for the promo, uh, "Do or Die," the mantra, where it started to get a lot more violent. Friends of ours, people that me and Antoine grew up with, murdered. Others committed suicide. I mean, just a lot of. So it's a mixed bag, to be quite honest, bro. Growing up in Milwaukee.
I'm kind of not too far from you. I'm from Indiana, and my uncle is James Cameron. Does that
Oh,
name
okay,
ring a
word
bell?
up. It
Yeah.
does, yeah, yeah.
So he,
Wow. There
yeah,
you
he
go.
has the Black Holocaust Museum there.
Yep. In fact, he was supposed to be dead along with them other dudes that was hung on those trees. You know what I'm saying? So
Absolutely.
yeah, James Cameron is absolute legend in Milwaukee. I definitely know. Okay. Salute.
Salute to you. Can you take me back to any other obstacles you had to endure growing up in Milwaukee as a teen?
I mean, numerous ones, bro. I mean, racism, I grew up I was born the year Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So the racism was very stark. And growing up as the only black family in an all-white neighborhood, there was gangs that was called the greasers back in the day, and there was numerous run-ins with them where they were literally, to be honest, when I was a little kid, beating us, me and my brother up. Um, my older sister, my brother, and I would get into fights with these dudes often. As we got older, there was serious run-ins with them, including guns and everything, because one day I got home from school, they had broken into my living room window of our house, my family's house, and took all of our furniture out of the living room window, took it out, put it on top of the roof of the house, painted swastikas all on the front doors, used sledgehammers to crush all of our backyard toys and slides and swing sets and things that kids play on, you know. So I mean, I say all of that to say the tension was more than just tension, like you could feel it. It was real, intangible violence with racial issues growing up. So it was, and that's just one issue. That's just one situation I could just mention. There's numerous.
Right. Can you take me back to some of your earlier influences before you were into music, some of your influences as you were growing up?
Yeah, I was influenced a lot by, well, pop culture. You know what I'm saying? I mean, Happy Days was based in Milwaukee. I was influenced by that. It was the #1 show at one time. Laverne and Shirley, these types of things. I was influenced by Good Times, and, you know, was deeply in love with the sister on Good Times.
Thelma? Is that
Thelma,
Thelma?
yeah. You know it. And so, but I was also in love with Farrah Fawcett. Like back in these days, Black people didn't have a lot of people on television. So white America and white media was basically, it was the media. So a lot of us, and I can speak for myself, you know, we were very influenced by a lot of the stuff that was going on. Being raised in a primarily white neighborhood, I loved Queen, I loved Kiss. This is music, but I loved, you know, a lot of rock stuff. You know, so I was into a lot of different things growing up. And plus, being in Milwaukee, you may be able to relate to this, but it wasn't like being in New York or LA. It was a very, it's a Midwestern town, so a lot of influences from everywhere influenced us. I mean, we didn't have the privilege, in a sense, to sort of claim our own stake in anything per se. You know,
Right.
we loved house music, which was in Chicago, right about 90 miles from us. We loved go-go music from DC. We loved rock music. We loved, you know, the East Coast hip hop. We loved West Coast hip hop. So it was like we just were into a lot of stuff, and I know it has a lot of influence on what I like musically, even to this day.
Right. Can you take me back to your earliest memory? Like you said, we wasn't from New York, we wasn't from LA. What was your first memory around the way of hip hop firsthand, you seeing it in Milwaukee?
Well, for me, the first time I heard it was Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight. And I heard that record, and me and a great friend of mine, unfortunately, rest in peace, T.A. Wiz was murdered. We heard it, and we came to school that next morning and talked about this record like for hours, because we were literally blown away by the fact that there was this, you could tell that there was something new in the world, like something that, you know, it's a fusion, obviously, but it had, in and of itself, it had never been done before. So although there's nothing new in the world, this was a fusion of two things that had never been mixed together in this way. And that's what I thought was so amazing about hip hop. So I listened to Rapper's Delight, and just the whole fact that people were, you know, rhyming and sort of talking over a record 12 minutes long or something like that. I forget exactly, but it was real long. And then like next up, coming up soon would be records like The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash and The Adventures of the Wheels, Adventures on the Wheels of Steel. And that was mind blowing, because now you got a record playing, and on the record that's playing was people scratching records, which was just, people that live nowadays in hip hop can, you know, that's a usual thing. But for us in the late 70s, that was revolutionary. Like, it was unheard of that someone would scratch a record. It was unheard of that people would rap over a beat for 12 minutes. These were things that were just absolutely 100% new concepts to us. And then not to mention beatbox and breakdance and b-boys, you know, so the whole culture was mind blowing. And so I used to get tapes from New York. I had some people and family members that lived in New York. Mixtapes was floating around back then. And I would try to get, well, not try, they would send me tapes. There was a show called Graffiti Rock on television. I used to watch that, and that had like a lot of b-boy, b-girl culture in it. And of course, movies like Breakin' or Beat Street, or, you know what I'm saying? Like these types of movies also influenced me early on, because even though I'd heard scratching on record, I didn't know what it looked like at first. And the first time I ever saw someone actually scratch was Grand Mixer DST on the Grammys scratching for Herbie Hancock on the song Rocket. And I had heard the song, but I didn't know how that noise was being created. And then I started DJing soon after, and I started spinning myself.
Was that your first foray into hip hop? Most people say they were dancers. Most people say, you know, they were graffiti artists. Was DJing your first
Yeah,
foray?
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. It was DJing. I mean, I danced a little bit, like I was breaking a little bit, but DJing was my thing. And anybody that's from Milwaukee that was around during the time when hip hop started in Milwaukee would say without question that I was one of the top DJs in the city. Like that's undisputable.
Can you take us back to a time frame? 80.
Yeah, I would probably say I had to say like 81, 82, 83, somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
somewhere. Yeah.
That's crazy.
All the way to when I left, like 87. I left in 87.
Can you talk about that time frame? Some of the dues you had to pay early on to get noticed?
I mean, all from scratch, just doing gigs for free at first, DJ gigs for free. My father owned a nightclub. My mom and dad are serial entrepreneurs. So my dad owned this nightclub called the Fox Trap. Before that, it was called Rich Man, Poor Man. And basically, I used to spin at that. I learned how to spin from the DJs he already had on there. But I was spinning hip-hop style. They were spinning what used to be the regular style of DJing, where a record would play out, all the way fade out, and then they would fade in another record. But it wasn't on beat, and it wasn't constant music like hip-hop would introduce. So yeah, so basically I was spinning, you know, coming up from scratch, just doing house parties for free initially, then started charging a little bit. I probably at my highest was charging $200 a gig or something like that, which for a young, you know, 13 to 17-year-old dude, I felt like I was everything. I felt like I was living large.
So you tell me you leave in 87. What goes on with Speech and where does he go to in 87?
Well, at that time I was called DJ Peach. And when I went to Atlanta, I moved from Milwaukee in 87 to Atlanta. When I got to Atlanta, I changed my name from Peach to Speech. I put an S in front of it because I was rhyming more. I wanted to, you know, I had done a little rhyming in 87 and 86 with a group called Attack. It was me, a brother that's actually quite famous in these parts in Atlanta named DJ Kimmett, but his name was Special K back then. And T.A. Wiz, who I was telling you was my partner who got murdered. So me, T.A. Wiz, and Special K was a group called Attack. I was rhyming with that and DJing. But when I got to Atlanta, I was just really wanting to focus heavy on rhyming. And so I put an S in front of it, in front of Peach, and just became Speech. Then I hung up a flyer on the wall of the school I went to. I went to the Art Institute of Atlanta here. And I hung up a flyer looking for a DJ because I wanted to start a crew. And a brother named Headliner, who was named Tim, was looking at the flyer. Me and him started connecting and vibing. And he was the first dude I brought into this group. And then, you know, we went from there.
Can you take me back to the early formulation of Arrested Development? What was the concept behind the group? Was the name Arrested Development? And how did you recruit other artists to be in the group?
Yeah, so it started off as like almost like a sound system, similar to Soul to Soul. Like Soul to Soul out of London had Jazzy B as sort of the hub, right? And then from Jazzy B, you had like all these different guest artists. And if you remember the first Soul to Soul record, it was a bunch of different singers from Karen Wheeler to others that would guest on the record. Well, the early days of what would be called Arrested Development, at that time we would probably call Secret Society or Disciples of a Lyrical Rebellion, something like that. But in the early days, it was that way. We would have the headliner would be spinning, I would be rhyming, I would invite, you know, African drummers on stage. We had about 6 or 7 dancers that would come up on stage. We had people that would would paint while we were rocking on stage. So it was, to be honest, sort of like the beginnings of this legendary party down here called Funk Jazz Cafe by my man Jason Orr. It was like the beginnings of that kind of vibe. And yeah, so that's sort of like how it started. And group members would come on, or people would come on stage, rock with us week after week. And that became sort of like, it started to solidify with people that consistently was vibing with us. Airly Tariq was one of those people where she was vibing with us so much that she joined the group in a sense. And then Ishi, another great example. Ishi was, a dancer that her and her sister was sort of messing around with us, but her sister was too busy. She was dancing with James Brown and others. And so Ishi was like, yo, she was only 13 at the time. So it made sense for her to hang and start messing around with it. None of us was getting paid. It wasn't about money. It was just about creativity and trying to do something special and new. And that's how, the crew sort of grew from that point.
At what point did you guys start to make demos and shop your deal?
It was pretty early on. Like early on, really myself and Headliner would put out records. Like we would, in fact, I got to shout out some people that paid for those early records because we didn't have the money. A friend of mine named Andrew White, brother from Bahamas, who was at school with us at the Art Institute, him, his brother, these were the type cats that would help pay for the vinyl. But we were making little records here and there, recording at a famous dude here in Atlanta named Albert Burroughs' studio. And, we were just doing what we can. We would press up 200 vinyl or 100 vinyl and put it out and, try to shop it around and get people to, listen to it. And sooner or later, Headliner's girlfriend, who was the C of TLC at the time, she ended up getting replaced by Chili, who became the C of TLC. But her name was Crystal. And Crystal and our dude Ian Burke, who's a legend here in Atlanta, both of them pitched it to Michael Malden, who is the father of Jermaine Dupri. I know I'm just dropping a lot of names.
It's all
but
good.
This is the history of it all. So like Michael Malden, the father of Jermaine Dupri, had already signed a deal with his son, Jermaine, and Jermaine had signed this group called Silk Times Leather. And so it was only one person we knew of that was doing hip hop that was signed to any major labels in Atlanta, and that was Jermaine, and he only had one group at the time. He was working on Crisscross and, of course, a lot of other stuff that he would do later. But initially it was, Silk Times Leather. And so, yeah, we hooked up with Michael Malden, and he started shopping us around, and it started to pick up from there. We got this offer from Chrysalis Records, and we ended up signing with them.
Before we get into Chrysalis, what kind of reaction did you get from other labels? And can you tell us what other labels maybe he had pitched you guys to?
Yeah, we pitched it to everybody. So Def Jam, saying Sony, Universal, Warner Brothers, you name it. We pitched it to everybody. The only label that bit was Chrysalis. And I think the reason why, because it was daring. Like the music didn't feel like everybody else's. If you know about the history of hip hop, at that time the South wasn't on yet. So there was local groups in Atlanta, but they weren't worldwide. Didn't nobody know about them across the world per se. So there was no real worldwide scene in the Atlanta hip hop music scene yet. So the furthest Southern energy you got in hip hop at that time was Ghetto Boys out of Texas and Luke out of Miami. And so Luke was huge out of Miami, but Miami's more like a coastal thing instead of like a Southern hip hop. Like when people think of Southern hip hop, at least we didn't think of that. Like Miami was its own world. It's just a different place. So yeah, it was very different at that time. We were sort of, record labels were a little scared to even try to rep the South. I mean, everything in hip hop was either East Coast or West Coast. It wasn't too much else that mattered in hip hop at the time.
We'll come back to those labels after a point in time. But what was it about Chrysalis that was so appealing that you guys decided to go with them?
They were the only ones that wanted us. That was it. Yeah. All the other ones that turned us down. It was a lot of rejection letters over the years. And, the first album title of our debut is 3 years, 5 months, and 2 days in the life of. It's how long it took us to get a record deal. And so we were getting rejected